Imagine the sheer terror of sitting in a premium first-class seat that you paid for with your own hard-earned money, only to look down moments later and see cold, rigid steel ratcheting tightly around your wrists. Picture the absolute humiliation as a heavy combat boot stomps directly onto a handwritten birthday card from your elderly mother, grinding a smear of black grease over her loving words while dozens of passengers point their glowing phone cameras at your face. This is the harrowing reality of what transpired inside the cabin of a commercial flight, an escalating nightmare sparked entirely by prejudice, power trips, and a profound lack of human decency. But what the arrogant security guards and the dismissive gate agents didn't realize until it was catastrophically too late was that the quiet, unassuming man they had just brutally dragged out of seat 2A in handcuffs didn't just belong in first class. He owned the entire multi-billion-dollar airline. He owned the physical aircraft they were standing on, and he was the exact man who signed every single one of their paychecks. The afternoon had begun with a deceptive sense of normalcy. Julian Vance sat quietly in seat 2A, a highly coveted window spot in the first-class cabin. Dressed in a faded gray hoodie, a pair of well-worn sneakers, and holding a paperback novel whose spine had gone soft from years of reading, he looked nothing like the stereotypical high-flying corporate executives who usually occupied this section of the plane. Just 90 seconds prior to boarding, Julian had quietly tipped a visibly exhausted airport barista $10 on a simple $4 cup of black coffee. Moments later, as he stepped onto the jet bridge, he had effortlessly lifted a heavy, oversized suitcase onto the escalator step for an elderly woman who was struggling alone, doing so without uttering a single word or seeking an ounce of validation. Nobody looked twice at him. Nobody suspected who he was. And that was precisely how Julian preferred to live his life when he traveled. He believed in quiet dignity, in being a human being among human beings, stripped of titles and corporate armor. "Excuse me, sir, but there seems to be a question regarding your boarding pass." A sharp, patronizing voice cut through the ambient hum of the cabin. "Do you happen to have a second form of identification?" Julian slowly lowered his book. Standing over him was Ethan Cross, a gate agent in his late 20s who wore his company lanyard like a badge of absolute authority, clutching a clipboard he clearly did not need. Ethan's eyes barely brushed past Julian's face before dropping back down to the screen of his handheld scanner. "This is seat 2A, Julian replied evenly, his voice maintaining a calm, measured cadence. "Would you like to scan the pass one more time just to be sure?" "This is the first-class cabin," Ethan replied, his tone laced with a subtle, condescending skepticism that spoke volumes. "I just need to verify that you are actually supposed to be in this right seat." Without a word of protest, Julian reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his driver's license, and held it out. Ethan snatched it and began studying the plastic card far longer than was ever necessary. He turned it back and forth in the ambient lighting of the plane, glancing repeatedly from the official photo to Julian's face, then back again, searching aggressively for a discrepancy that did not exist. Directly across the aisle, in seat 3C, a wealthy woman draped in elegant pearls sipped expensive champagne. Just behind her, a man wearing a deeply wrinkled business suit shoved an oversized carry-on bag violently into the overhead bin. Neither of them had been questioned. Neither of them had been asked to prove their worth. Nobody asked them for a single shred of extra documentation. Julian noticed this double standard. He always noticed. Ethan clicked his pen twice, then 3 times, a nervous, aggressive rhythm. Without returning the identification, the gate agent turned on his heel and walked briskly toward the forward galley, holding Julian's driver's license tightly in his hand. "That belongs to me," Julian called out firmly, though he refrained from raising his voice. "1 second, sir!" Ethan shot back over his shoulder before disappearing through the heavy privacy curtain. Through the narrow gap in the fabric, Julian watched the young gate agent lift a handheld radio to his mouth, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper while angling his shoulder away to prevent anyone from reading his lips. Julian did not need to hear the exact words to know what was happening. He had lived enough life to recognize the anatomy of suspicion. Instead of reacting with anger, he took his mother's birthday card, the one she had tenderly slipped into his bag right before he left the house, telling him to read it only when the plane reached altitude, and placed it face down on his knee. He kept his hands open, flat and completely visible, a defensive posture he had tragically been forced to teach himself a very long time ago. The man who eventually stepped through the curtain to confront Julian was older, well into his 50s, with thick, imposing shoulders and a heavy security supervisor's badge clipped tightly to his belt. The plastic name tag read, Garrison. He didn't just look at Julian. He stared at him the way an elite looked down at a stubborn stain on an expensive carpet. His eyes tracked Julian from his worn sneakers up to his gray hoodie, and then back down again. First class, huh? Garrison let the words hang in the air, thick with unspoken accusations. You fly up here very often, buddy? When I travel, yes, Julian answered calmly. Is there an issue with my ticket? That depends entirely on you, Garrison said, sliding Julian's driver's license deep into his own uniform shirt pocket. In my 20 years of doing this job, I've developed a real gut feeling about people. And right now, I'm getting a real strong feeling about you. Garrison leaned his heavy frame directly onto the back of the seat in front of Julian, invading his personal space. How does a guy who looks like you afford a luxury seat like this? Did you use points? Is this someone else's credit card? The entire first-class cabin had gone completely silent. The hum of casual conversation died instantly. Across the aisle, the woman in the pearls leaned over and whispered loudly to her husband, "Look at him. Some of us actually paid for our seats." "I paid for it myself," Julian said, maintaining an eerie, unshakable composure. "The exact same way everyone else up here did." "Oh, I'm sure you did," Garrison sneered. He straightened his spine and immediately keyed the radio on his shoulder. "Yeah, this is Garrison. I'm going to need a second unit down here at Gate D7 immediately. We have an uncooperative individual on board the aircraft." Uncooperative? Julian had not raised his voice even a fraction of a decibel. He hadn't left the confines of his seat. He hadn't gestured aggressively. "While we wait for backup," Garrison said, folding his massive arms across his chest, "let's clear something up right now. Do you have any actual proof that you paid for this specific seat?" "The boarding pass you scanned is the proof," Julian stated, "and you are currently holding the legal identification that matches the name the seat was booked under." "Anybody can forge or print a fake boarding pass these days," Garrison countered, nodding pointedly at Julian's jacket pocket. "I mean real, undeniable proof. Open up your phone, pull up your personal bank account, and show me the actual line item charge for this flight." The sheer absurdity of the demand hung heavily in the air. It took Julian a full second to process what he was being asked to do. Across the aisle, the businessman in the wrinkled suit stared intently at his own phone screen, consciously forcing himself not to look at the unfolding drama, terrified of getting involved. Nobody was asking that businessman to open up his private banking app. Nobody would ever dare demand such a violation of privacy from him. For a fleeting moment, a fierce refusal sat right on the tip of Julian's tongue. He wanted to scream every single reason why this was fundamentally, legally, and morally wrong. But then he thought about the second security unit that was already sprinting down the jet bridge. He thought about the 40 pairs of eyes watching his every move, waiting for him to fit the stereotype of the aggressive, unruly passenger. He knew the volatile math of the situation. So, he took a deep breath, retrieved his phone, opened his banking application, and scrolled down to the transaction. It clearly displayed the airline's own corporate name, Vanguard Airlines, his own name, and the exact 4-digit fare. He turned the glowing screen directly toward the security supervisor. "There," Julian said. "Paid in full 3 days ago." Garrison glanced at the screen for less than half a heartbeat, completely unmoved. "That could be absolutely anybody's account," he scoffed. "It literally has my legal name printed right on it." "Names are easy to fake," Garrison replied smoothly. He had already moved the goalposts because the presence of proof had never been the actual point of the interaction. The truth didn't matter to Garrison. As Julian slowly lowered his phone, he understood with absolute chilling clarity exactly where this situation was headed. He had been in rooms like this before throughout his life. Smaller rooms, back alleys, corporate boardrooms where he was doubted. He just never in his wildest dreams imagined it would happen on board one of his own commercial aircraft. Before Julian could utter another word, Garrison reached up, popped the latch on the overhead bin, and violently pulled down Julian's canvas carry-on bag as if it were already marked as criminal evidence. You cannot search my personal property, Julian said, his body shifting halfway out of his seat. I do not consent to this. Sit back down, Garrison barked, dropping the canvas bag heavily onto the empty aisle seat next to Julian and unzipping it with one violent ripping motion. On board this aircraft, I don't need your permission for a damn thing. That statement was a blatant lie, and deep down, some rational part of Garrison probably knew it. But the cabin was entirely filled with passive bystanders who had no intention of stepping in to stop a man wearing a badge. Garrison dug his hands deep into the bag, pulling out Julian's private belongings in front of the entire audience of strangers. He pulled out a neatly folded spare shirt, a tangled phone charger, and then a plastic bottle of prescription medication. It was Julian's mother's blood pressure pills, which he had promised her he would refill the moment he landed. Garrison held each item up in the air, a beat too long, practically narrating the search with his smug, accusatory eyes, silently telling the cabin, "See, look at what we've got here." Then, the supervisor's fingers closed around something resting at the very bottom of the bag. He pulled out a heavy laminated security card attached to a high-quality lanyard. It was Julian's executive credential. It featured a high-resolution photograph of Julian's face, the official gold-embossed logo of Vanguard Airlines, and the word director printed in clean, bold, unmistakable capital letters. Julian's heart lifted just a fraction. He felt a sudden surge of relief. "That is my official company identification," Julian said, pointing directly at the card. "Look at it. Really look at it this time." Garrison glanced down at the credential. He saw the official corporate logo. He saw the high-ranking title. He saw the face that perfectly matched the man sitting right in front of him. And then, with a look of utter disgust, he tossed the credential carelessly back into the open bag. "Fake!" Garrison declared loudly, his voice echoing through the cabin. "Or it's stolen. People who look like you don't run anything around here." The sheer, unadulterated cruelty of the statement was almost clean in its execution. The literal, undeniable answer to the very question Garrison had been badgering him about had just been placed directly into his palm, and he had thrown it away simply because the reality of the situation did not fit the prejudiced story he had already written in his mind. Just then, a flight attendant appeared from the galley, holding 2 cups of water intended for the first-class passengers. Her name tag read, Clara Jenkins. She set the waters down hastily, her eyes darting between the chaos and Julian's calm face. "Sir, he hasn't caused a single bit of trouble," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly but determined. "I've been stationed right here in the galley the entire time. He's been completely polite." "Stay out of this, Clara," Garrison snapped, not even bothering to turn his head to look at her. "This is strictly an official security matter." "But he's literally just been sitting there." "One more single word out of your mouth, Jenkins, and you're kicked off this flight crew permanently," Garrison threatened, his tone snapping shut like a heavy iron door. Clara's mouth closed instantly. She caught Julian's eye for a brief second, and in her expression was a profound, heartbreaking apology. An apology she possessed absolutely no institutional power to make good on. Suddenly, the heavy metallic cabin door thudded open against the fuselage. 2 more airport security officers strode down the jet bridge, their heavy tactical boots squeaking against the floor, their shoulder radios hissing with static. Garrison squared his massive shoulders. He now had his audience, he had his narrative, and most importantly, he had his physical backup. "All right," Garrison ordered, looking down at Julian. "You're getting off this aircraft right now." "On what legal grounds?" Julian asked, remaining firmly and calmly seated. "On the grounds that I said so," Garrison growled. Julian felt the instinctive, primal trap tightening within his own body. Every human reflex screamed at him to fight back, to resist the injustice. But he knew the script. The moment a camera captures a struggling minority man, the narrative freezes, the context is stripped away, and society justifies the violence used against him. There was no version of this reality where his physical resistance would save him. So, Julian made a conscious, tactical choice. He gently placed his mother's birthday card down on the empty seat, slowly raised both of his hands into the air, keeping them completely open, and spoke in a booming, clear voice that carried perfectly to every single recording smartphone in the cabin. "I am not resisting," Julian announced loudly. "I want every single person with a phone out to record this clearly. I am not resisting." "Smart move," Garrison muttered sarcastically. In a flash, Garrison grabbed Julian's forearm. The sharp mechanical ratchet of the handcuffs cutting through the quiet cabin was a terrifying sound. That quick, ugly zip of steel teeth biting down. The freezing metal closed tightly around one wrist, then the other. Julian Vance had committed absolutely no crime. He had presented a valid boarding pass, a legal driver's license, a verified banking charge, and an official executive company ID. Yet, he was currently being aggressively handcuffed in a first-class seat for the sole offense of sitting in it while occupying a space someone decided he didn't belong in. The officers hauled him violently out of the seat. In the struggle, Julian's shoulder cracked heavily against the hard plastic edge of a neighboring seatback. One of his old sneakers slipped completely off his foot, left behind on the floorboard. The canvas carry-on bag tipped over, its contents spilling across the carpeted aisle, his spare shirt, the scattered blood pressure pills, and his mother's birthday card. The card landed wide open right in the center of the walkway, just as Garrison took a heavy step forward. The supervisor's massive boot came down directly onto the card, grinding a thick, dirty print right across the elegant, sweeping handwriting of Julian's mother. Julian watched it happen in slow motion. Something deep inside his chest went incredibly tight, cold and white. "Mommy, why are those men hurting that man?" A toddler's voice rose up from a few rows back, bright, innocent, and terrified. No one in the cabin answered her. They marched Julian out through the gauntlet of the cabin, through the enclosed jet bridge, and directly into the blindingly bright public glare of the airport terminal. They forced him down onto a hard metal bench pressed against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, leaving his spilled personal belongings scattered on the floor of the aircraft behind him. The three security officers turned their backs to him, forming a literal wall of uniforms, and shared a low, mocking laugh. A janitor who was mopping the tile floor nearby caught Julian's gaze and held it. The janitor didn't turn away. Instead, he gave Julian a very slow, meaningful nod of solidarity. Julian, sitting in handcuffs with one shoe missing, nodded back. Then, using his restricted hands behind his back, Julian managed to maneuver his phone out of his hoodie pocket. He pressed a speed dial number that he knew by heart. "Vanguard Operations, this is Victoria." A sharp, authoritative voice answered on the first ring. "Victoria, it's Julian." The tone of Julian's voice caused an immediate shift on the other end of the line. Julian turned his body slightly away from the oblivious officers, keeping his voice incredibly low. "I am currently at Gate D7. I am sitting in handcuffs. Your airport security team just violently pulled me out of Seat 2A on Flight 441 and cuffed me in front of the entire cabin. I need you to come down here right now." The phone line went completely dead for 2 seconds. When Victoria Sterling spoke again, her voice was vibrating with a terrifying, suppressed fury. "I am leaving my desk this exact second. Julian, do not say another single word to those men until I get there." Garrison suddenly noticed the hushed phone call and spun around, stepping toward the bench. "Who the hell do you think you're phoning right now? Your lawyer isn't going to beat your flight out of here, pal." "That wasn't my lawyer," Julian said, his voice as calm and still as deep water. "That was the person who actually runs this entire airline." Garrison barked out a loud, mocking laugh. "Oh, okay, sure it was." But a mere 2 minutes later, the heavy security doors across the concourse banged open with immense force. Victoria Sterling, the chief operating officer of Vanguard Airlines, crossed the gate area at a frantic, terrifying pace. The sharp click of her high heels struck the ceramic tiles like synchronized gunshots, her executive badge swinging wildly against her chest. She didn't look at the gate agents. She didn't look at the crowd. She dropped directly into a crouch right in front of the metal bench, her eyes locking instantly onto the steel cuffs binding Julian's wrists. "Mr. Vance," Victoria breathed, her voice cracking with shock. "Who did this to you? Who put these on you?" "Ma'am, you need to step back immediately," Garrison interrupted, stepping forward officiously. "This is an active security matter." Victoria stood up slowly, turning her full frame toward Garrison. When she spoke, her voice possessed a booming, resonant power that carried to every single far corner of the crowded gate area. "This man is Julian Vance!" Victoria shouted, her words slicing through the terminal. "He is the founder, the owner, and the chief executive officer of Vanguard Airlines. He owns this entire company. He owns the physical aircraft you just illegally dragged him off of. He signs your damn paychecks, and you just put him in handcuffs." The silence that followed had a physical texture to it. It was thick, heavy, and absolute. The realization rippled through the gathered crowd of passengers, phone by phone, screen by screen, until a passenger near the front of the line whispered the words aloud to the person next to them. Oh my God, they cuffed the actual owner. Garrison's eyes drifted, entirely against his own free will, toward the open canvas carry-on bag resting on the bench. His gaze landed directly on the heavy laminated credential stamped with the word Director, the exact same card he had confidently called a fake just 10 minutes prior, now lying right there where he had carelessly thrown it. The color drained from Garrison's face in visible stages, turning a sickening ash gray. A few feet back in the boarding line, the social shift rippled outward instantly. The woman in the pearls, who had just minutes ago loudly complained about people not paying for their seats, slowly set her champagne glass down on a terminal table, her face entirely pale with embarrassment. The businessman, who had been desperately trying to avoid looking at the situation, suddenly found the tips of his shoes to be the most fascinating objects in the world. "Take them off him right now," Victoria commanded, her eyes burning into Garrison. The second security officer fumbled violently with the small key, his hands shaking so uncontrollably that he dropped it once before finally getting it into the lock. The cuffs clicked open with a heavy metallic release. Julian slowly rolled his wrists, inspecting the deep, dark red lines that the steel had pressed into his skin. He stood up to his full, imposing height. He didn't gloat. He didn't yell. He didn't exhibit a single shred of petty triumph. That wasn't the kind of power Julian Vance carried. "You wanted me to prove to you that I could afford that seat?" Julian said quietly, his voice cutting through the silent terminal like a razor blade. "I own the entire plane, Garrison." "Mr. Vance, I had absolutely no way of knowing. You had a company ID with your face on it, but you called it a fake." Julian's voice never rose, remaining terrifyingly level. "You told me you get regular briefings about exactly who you need to watch out for in this airport. You said I fit the briefing perfectly." Julian let the words hang in the air, allowing the crushing weight of the implication to land squarely on the supervisor's chest. "That right there is the exact problem," Julian continued. "You should treat every single human being with basic decency when you don't know who they are. That is the entire point of this. A man should not have to own the entire damn airplane just to sit in his seat in peace." Garrison had absolutely no answer. The excuses had run completely dry. His career, his authority, and his reputation had vanished in the span of a single conversation. Julian turned his back on the security team and looked directly at Victoria. "Ground every single Vanguard aircraft immediately," he ordered coldly. "Nothing pushes back from a gate, nothing takes off, and nothing moves on the tarmac until I know exactly how this happened and exactly who allowed this culture to exist." "Sir!" Victoria hesitated for a fraction of a second, realizing the gravity of the command. "That is the entire national fleet. That is 180 aircraft." "I know exactly how many airplanes I own, Victoria," Julian said. "Ground them now." The unprecedented corporate order went out in under 60 seconds. From coast to coast, across every major airport hub in the country, digital flight monitors flipped instantly from green to red. Gate by gate, massive jet engines spun down into silence. 180 commercial aircraft sat frozen on the hot tarmac, disrupting thousands of schedules, costing millions of dollars in revenue, all because of the prejudiced actions of 3 arrogant individuals at Gate D7. The corporate and legal reckoning struck with absolute precision, targeting exactly where the systemic power had been abused. Garrison and the 2 responding security officers were stripped of their badges within the hour, escorted out of the airport in disgrace. Furthermore, Julian did not let it remain an internal HR matter. Garrison was officially charged under federal civil rights law for unlawful detention, conducting a search without legal consent, and the deprivation of civil rights under color of authority. Ethan Cross, the young gate agent who had started the entire chain reaction, lost his job that very afternoon. He chose not to fight the termination. During the subsequent legal deposition, when he was forced to testify on camera, he finally admitted the ugly truth out loud. When asked why he singled Julian out, he looked down at his lap, his face going completely gray, and said, "He just didn't look like the kind of person who belonged up front." But the story didn't end with a few firings. The comprehensive audit that Julian ordered tore open the dark, hidden files that the airline's old management team had buried deep within the Human Resources Archive for years. The investigation uncovered 9 separate formal complaints lodged against Garrison over the course of 6 years, almost all of them submitted by passengers of color who had experienced the exact same profiling. Every single one of those 9 files had been stamped unsubstantiated by corrupt middle managers. One cruel man can cause a lot of damage, Julian told his board of directors during an emergency meeting a week later, but it takes an entire corrupt institution to protect him. The managers who had shredded and hidden those 9 complaints were terminated immediately. At the federal trial, months later, the prosecutor froze the security footage on the exact frame where Garrison held Julian's official director credential in his hand, looked at it, and carelessly tossed it into the bag. The prosecutor turned to the jury and pointed at the screen. He held the undeniable proof in his hands, the prosecutor argued. He read the high-ranking title. He saw the face, but he called it a fake simply because the truth did not fit the prejudiced story he had already chosen to believe 9 times before this. The jury took less than an hour to return a verdict of guilty. What Julian Vance built next outlasted the viral headlines and the public scandal. He implemented a comprehensive passenger bill of rights, which was permanently posted in bold print at every single airport gate nationwide. The new policy explicitly stated that passengers have the legal right to record interactions, the right to ask for the legal grounds of any detention, and established an independent ombudsman office completely separate from airport management to handle complaints. Furthermore, the airline instituted a rigorous, empathy-based cultural training program for all flight crews, completely designed and led by Clara Jenkins, the flight attendant, who had possessed the courage to speak up when no one else would. Finally, Julian established a multi-million-dollar collegiate scholarship fund. The first 9 recipients of that full ride were the exact 9 individuals whose complaints against Garrison had been buried and ignored over the years. As for the birthday card from his mother, the one that had been stamped by a security boot, the dirty print was never fully cleaned off the paper. Julian had the card carefully framed in heavy glass. It hangs on the wall of his main executive office today. It is by far the smallest item on the wall, yet it is the one object he looks at more than anything else he owns. It serves as a permanent, quiet reminder of the day he was forced to remind the world that respect should never depend on who someone turns out to be.